Hello everyone, Manny here, and in today's video we're going to do basic maintenance on our GBBR, or our gas blowback rifle. I noticed that I haven't uploaded a video about that, and I do use gas blowbacks quite a lot, so we're going to be doing that today. I'm going to go over what tools you'll need, as well as the maintenance, or the basic maintenance that a GBBR entails, as well as what to apply to the actual components themselves. So without further ado, let us begin. So for our first part, we're going to go over exactly what the basic tools that you'll need. You won't need all these tools, but it makes the job a lot easier. And some of the stuff you'll actually need, like the grease itself. So for that, to start off, if you can get yourself some medical gloves, non-latex gloves, that will be good, because it'll keep your hands and all the gunk that is inside it from getting in your hands and having to deal with it. Sometimes the residue doesn't fully wash off immediately. The next thing that you'll need is a multi-purpose synthetic grease. Now, there's a reason why I am not using silicone. The reason that I'm not using silicone, and I'll show a actual example of what I previously used, and I usually use silicone lubricant grease with actual mechanical parts like the AEGs on the gears and stuff like that, because it remains there longer. It can take a lot more heat, friction, but the issue with that is that when you combine silicone with silicone, the actual friction level is a lot higher, which means the wear and tear on your GBBR parts, which are moving, right, and are some of them are actually made out of silicone, will cause issues with it. So that's why we're using multi-purpose synthetic grease. It is not petroleum based, it's food grade. So what will happen is it'll ensure that it doesn't cause friction to the point where your parts are wearing out as much. If you're looking to have a little bit more less thick grease, you can make a combination of 1-to-1 ratio with a oil-based multi-purpose synthetic grease, which will make it a little bit more fluid-like, or not as thick as the actual grease. But for these purposes, we're going to use this. The other thing that you'll need is a punch hole set to get the pins. Some of the pins sometimes, and some of the replicas might be a little bit too hard, and you don't want to mess up like your screwdrivers or anything like that. So a pin punch set helps, as well as a rubber mallet to ensure you don't damage any other metal parts if you're hitting it with a punch set. Lastly, you'll need a few Q-tips to try to get into those hard places to try to clean it, as well as some napkins and or a rag that you're not using it, as well as a clearing rod to clean the actual inner barrel itself. So for the replica of choice that we're going to be using for this is the KWA LM4 PTR. The main reason that I'm using this is because, again, I used this rifle as my first GBBR, and to be honest, there is a lot of modifications that I've done to it, and it's still working perfectly fine. To start off, we will just make sure you put on your gloves and get a punch set. We'll punch the pins out to remove the upper receiver from the lower receiver. For the most part, the process when it comes to GBBRs, right, for the most part, the upper receiver retracts from the lower receiver, which shouldn't have any issues. Once you remove that, we'll set the lower receiver down and remove the bolt itself. As you can see, this rifle has already been pretty much wiped down. If you notice the difference with my bolt compared to maybe if you're using a LM4, is that it looks a lot more silver in color, and that is because I polished the bolt itself so that there's less friction on the inside when the bolt is cycling. So I will be making a mod about this later down the road, but for now let's focus on the maintenance. So for main starters, we're going to do the inner barrel cleanup. So there's several things that you can do. You can either use a small piece of cloth to clean the inside of the inner barrel with a little bit of rubbing alcohol. That would be one of it. And what you'll do is drive it forward as if it was an actual rifle all the way to the very end, and then you'll pull the actual rod all the way out. Before you do that though, my hop up is all the way down, so there's no pressure against it. You want to make sure you actually have it turned off, and that is mainly because you don't want to cause friction or probably any tear when you're putting the clearing rod through the actual inner barrel. Next part is the actual bucking on the inside. Now there's two ways of doing this. You can either get a Q-tip and try to wipe off with some rubbing alcohol that area to wipe off all the actual excess of green gas. If you use green gas, if you use propane, you should be fine. But if you actually use green gas, you want to actually get the bucking itself. Or if you want to be extra thorough about it, you can remove the inner barrel. That all depends on how you or what your actual replica and the way it disassembles. For the KWA, I would have to remove the whole handguard and then get the lock nut on the front to actually remove the whole barrel and make a change or barrel swap or bucking swap. But for this case, again, rubbing alcohol or a dry Q-tip, and you want to get all the excess grease, everything, so that way when you're actually firing the rifle, there's no grease, nothing interfering, nothing causing a reduction of friction between the actual bucking itself and the BB. Next up for the next part is, again, either a dry piece of paper towel or a piece of cloth that is not gunky with anything else. And what you'll do is you'll stuff into where the bolt receiver is, and you can use the clearing rod and kind of wipe off that area, wipe it off. Again, I had already done maintenance on this. I have done maintenance on this already, so wiping it down shouldn't produce a lot of, you know, residue of it, but you'll get all the gunk and whatever you see. If you've done maintenance on it, on a real rifle, on an actual AR or anything like that, the maintenance is pretty much the same. It's almost the same. The only difference that you're dealing here with is the actual bolt that is kind of different than, you know, an actual AR. It's not going to be the same. And you'll wipe down your charging handle and all that. So once you've gotten all the excess, all that gunk that is on the inside of the upper receiver, we will move on to the next part, which is the actual bolt. Now for the next part will be the actual most important part, which is the actual bolt itself. Now depending on your manufacturer's specification will depend on how you disassemble the bolt itself, but for the KWA there is a plate on the back of it that's retaining the actual nozzle ring or nozzle pin itself. You won't be able to pull it out until you remove that plate in the back. All you have to do is push it upwards and it should come off, and you should be able to pull the whole bolt itself, right? I'm not gonna do it because, to be exact, there's really not much to clean on the inside of it, but if you feel like cleaning it and adding some actual grease, right, or your type of lubricant that you're using, I suggest you remove it, since that is a secondary part that creates a lot of friction between plastic or polymer and metal itself. So applying some grease on the inside, especially on the O-ring that's on the inside, which causes the seal when you're actually shooting your GBBR, creates. Other than that, all you're going to do is make sure you wipe down the outside of the actual bolt. And like I said, if you don't want to remove your nozzle out, what you can do is hold it with one finger on the outside like this, right? Make sure that you don't fully are pulling it out or retracting it out, because you can damage the spring itself. Most GBBRs, what I know is that they do have springs that are held within the bolt to actually give it that that ability to reciprocate back and forth. And all you can do is get a Q-tip, clean the inside of the nozzle, all the good stuff, right? and you should get all the gunk and everything. Make sure not to put anything too nothing that's hard or of metal, the Q-tip itself, and then just wipe down the area where the nozzle seals with the bucking itself, so that way it can create a good seal and other gunk doesn't get in the way. So once you clean it, right, once you clean the actual bolt, the main portions that you're going to focus on applying your type of grease or your type of silicone, right, are going to be the spots that you notice a lot of friction, right? In this case, if you see on this bolt, there's a lot of friction on the bottom itself. You see these scrapes that are a lot shinier, right? You see the scrapes on the side that are a lot shinier, correct? Those are the parts that you're going to apply the actual grease, because that tells you, right, that when the bolt is cycling back and forth, there's a lot of friction to the point where there's a lot of heat, and it's causing for that area to either be faded out and or smoothed out. So that's one of the things. When it comes to your bolt itself, again, same thing, you're gonna notice it. But if you don't see any changes, what you're gonna want to do is primarily do the actual rails of the actual nozzle itself, as well as the actual O-ring that's on the inside. And you want to make sure that you don't put too much excess, because then you're going to be causing a slowdown on your bolt, or your bolt's going to have a hard time cycling, because there's not enough space to actually cycle and let that bolt carrier move back and forth, or that nozzle to move back and forth. So make sure you don't apply that much grease. All it needs, especially if it's multi-purpose synthetic grease, is just a thin, small layer onto it. Last but not least, ladies and gents, we're going to focus on the lower receiver. For the lower receiver, it's going to be kind of difficult unless you actually know how to remove the pins and take out the whole trigger group. I wouldn't recommend it if you're not specialized in this, or if you don't know how it exactly works. But primarily what you want to do is you'll pull the trigger in order to lift the actual trigger latch, or the trigger, this portion right here on the trigger latch. Most of the GBBR rifles have it. And on the inside, just check there's no dirt, gunk, or anything like that. If there is, you want to use some canned air or air pressure in order to get that dirt and as much as you can and grime out. I wouldn't recommend using Q-tips. What I would use is either a actual cloth or a piece of cloth that you can cut off, and try to stick it in there to let it absorb all of that oil and grease that might be built up. And once it absorbs all that, you pull it out. If you use a Q-tip or a piece of paper or a paper towel, what it's going to do, it might get stuck on one of the springs, and now you have a piece of paper cloth in there that's stuck, and it's just going to build up more gunk if you have a hard time removing it. So make sure you do it that way. And again, you can lubricate those areas. It is not necessary, but I would recommend it, mainly because to avoid any rust issues, any corrosion issues that might be caused during time, depending on the kind of weather that you use it. I usually use these guns in a more humid environment. That is why you have on the outside, I have all these parts that are kind of oxidized a little bit. I try to brush them down with the metal brush and stuff to keep it down, and sometimes I lubricate them so the metal absorbs it, and that way there's not moisture that's getting trapped when it's humid outside. But there's so much you can do about it. And the other last thing that you want to check is the buffer spring. If you pull out your buffer spring, at times there might be a bunch of oil and gunk on the inside of your buffer spring. You might want to clean that. Again, like I said, I cleaned this and put it in storage away a while ago, so the actual spring itself is pretty dry and clean so far. So there you have it, guys. That's how you perform a basic maintenance on your GBBR. If you have any questions, right, any concerns, or anything that you might think I didn't answer, leave your comment down below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and until next time. Some people believe it's rivaling even that of High Kappa and Glock for rifle, as well as we have pistols.